So now moving on to our last session. Sadly, there's a huge amount we could have done on this, but we're now going to move on to talking about landscape scale change. And if people haven't read it, I would thoroughly recommend a report that was written, albeit over 10 years ago now, by Professor Sir John Lawton, called Making Space for Nature. And he made the case for the importance of landscape scale changes. And that was about how nature as small oases, sites, or nature reserves wouldn't survive into the future. And what we needed to do was to link up nature, link up landscapes, connect sites together, create stepping stones so that species can move around our landscape. So landscape scale change is really important, and several of our projects have been working on this. The one that I visited recently down in Plymouth, the National Marine Park, which is one of our big National Lottery Heritage Fund Heritage Horizon projects, all about establishing a marine park there and taking a lot of the learning from the FPA project there as well. So really exciting stuff. I'm now going to hand over to John Holmes, who's Director of Strategy at Natural England, who's kindly agreed to chair this session for us. So over to you, John.
Good, I think we're going. So welcome everyone to this session on landscape change. I'm John Holmes, Strategy Director at Natural England. I've had a long career with the statutory agencies working on nature conservation. I think I shall own up and say I started that career very much in the sort of habitats and species specialism mode. I probably went as far as to think nature was where the people weren't, but that's not Natural England's mission. Natural England's mission is thriving nature for people and planet. And I'm increasingly ever more inspired and amazed by some of the outcomes that we can get by joining up and linking nature and outcomes for nature with great societal well-being, green job outcomes for people. It feels kind of obvious that you might get more of that at scale, and it's something we say quite often, but actually with scale can also come bigger challenges, complexity of potential outcomes, complexity of stakeholders and communities to deal with. And we're going to hear from two examples today where of working at scale in order to try and increase those benefits. We're going to hear from Martin Whitchurch from Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, and then from Zoe Sydenham from Plymouth. We were going to hear from Rob Pierce from Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, but unfortunately Rob hasn't been able to join us. So we'll spend a little longer with Martin and Zoe. Okay, thank you. So over to firstly Martin, please.
Hello, hello everybody. Thank you, John, for that introduction. So yeah, I'm Martin Whitchurch, Strategic Lead for Green Space in BCP Council. And on the next slide, I'll introduce BCP for those that might not be aware. We're on the south coast in between Dorset, or part of Dorset and next to Hampshire, nestled nicely between the Purbeck Hills and the New Forest. And as you can see there, we've got a range of, we've got some of the largest harbours in the world, we've got beautiful heathlands, and a range of biodiversity and green spaces across our conurbation. If it's not familiar to you, we were only formed in 2019, right at the start, and we got the FPA award of the project just before forming as BCP Council. So very much an interesting time politically and bringing three councils together. And you got some stats there about who we are and where we are. Also, just noting one of the earlier conversations about tree canopy cover. We've actually got 19% tree canopy cover already. We're working on a new tree and woodland strategy, which will take that even higher. So along with our 15 miles of coastline, makes for an exciting and interesting space to work. From the Future Parks project, we've got sort of boiled that down from 6 or 7 different project strands into 3 priority outputs or pieces of work that we're now taking forward. And that's what I want to talk you through today. So on the next slide, please. The first of those is our green infrastructure strategy. So without the Future Parks funding and project, we would have really struggled as a new authority to prioritise this and to make this happen. It really brought our teams together across from the different legacy authorities. We hope that we've set a really high ambition in our vision in terms of how we view our multifunctional green infrastructure network across the whole conurbation. We've got lots of blue on the coast, but those harbours and lakes and rivers as well, and lots of green across our parks and other green infrastructure estates. And the bit you're missing off at the bottom of the caption, actually, if you are missing that, we call this our green net. So that map there really helped to place with members how, what BCP looks like from a green infrastructure point of view. And that strategy has now gone through our cabinet and been formally adopted. So that will become part of the next, the BCP's first local plan in the next year or two. So the moving on to the next slide, the GI strategy really helped us to understand our place, like I say, as that new authority, understanding where our people are. The map there is with the black blobs on it is the areas of deprivation. So BCP and the coast isn't all about the really wealthy, most affluent areas on camphor cliffs or sandbanks that you might have seen. Actually, we've got some of the most deprived areas in the country as well. So we looked at our spaces. We did a park survey audit of over 400 open spaces with parks colleagues and stakeholders. We looked at a range of case studies and policy context, and we also had support with the writing of a natural capital report as well. And as you can see there, loads of stats were generated around that in terms of the benefits of parks and green space to the council and our local and our residents as well. So an average value of £20 per individual visit to a green space, and that's really important in making the argument to councillors and members about the importance of those spaces. If we have the next slide, please. So what we've done with the green infrastructure is really start to think about how we can use it and how it embeds with a lot of other cross kind of parks and green spaces and other council service pieces of work. So as I said, it will become a supporting evidence for the local plan in 2024. We're just about to go out on some public engagement. Some further funding we got through the FPA extension around urban greening, and we want to create a design code or a design guide. So how we make that a really BCP specific piece of work. So you got some examples on your screen, the bottom left, following on straight examples from those examples you saw a minute ago. That's a rain garden that's been one of our landscape architects designed and had put in Poole. So that takes all the surface water from the surrounding roads and spaces around it. And we designed a fantastic new multifunctional green space right in the heart of Poole. And whether it's green walls like the one in Bournemouth, it's already there as well. So we really want to show how we can embed all of those urban greening and ask our residents what would they like to see us do? What's the spaces that they think we could use differently? How would they like to give up some of their roadside spaces so we can plant trees or introduce a sub scheme from those brilliant examples you saw earlier? And also then embed it and sort of cross-fertilise it with biodiversity net gain delivery policies as well, trying to get more biodiversity into our housing developments as well. And then that's boiling into a GI delivery plan and priority work setting for our green spaces teams, linking with climate, linking with planning, sustainability, transport, and all those other services. So the green infrastructure is really shaping that whole piece and that whole picture for us in how it does that on a broad conurbation scale, but really being able to zoom in on the local kind of detailed information as well. If I could have the next slide, please. And then that links, and we're talking about landscape scale change, and this is something very much on a micro scale in local community parks, which is our Green Heart Parks model. With apologies to Edinburgh for stealing their title, but we think it fits so well we can not use it. So this is all about a positive spiral of improvement and activation in our local community parks. The spaces that everybody will have hopefully 10 to 15 minutes walk time from their doorstep. And what we hope is that we can create a model where we get an upward cycle of improvement and people loving their space instead of antisocial behaviour, closed or underused buildings, vandalism, drink and drug abuse, and kind of that spiral of neglect. We are lucky enough to have the Parks Foundation that we work really closely with, And the Parks Foundation are integral in terms of delivering this. So they've taken ownership of one of our old pavilions in a recreation ground that was no longer used. It was boarded and closed up. And they've turned that into a vibrant hub of the community with a cafe, with toilets that are open, with really friendly staff and a load of volunteering. And that sort of circular red arrow is kind of all the good stuff that it generates and benefits. It brings healthier communities, closer communities, safer spaces, and connects everybody with nature as well. So on the next slide, please. And the Green Heart Parks are something that we're only just embarking on, really. Those spaces on the right are just examples in Winton, where we've done things for nature, like putting in that giant pond, which has instantly brought not only wildlife, but people to that space and allowed them to engage with it, and really kind of focus people into terms of what's possible. So we're looking for those urban community parks around with densely populated areas and or deprivation. We want there to be play areas and buildings that we can use to then give over to community partners to take this forward, run their potential trading opportunities, offer out the activation. So is it nature tots? Is it a knit and natter group? Can the cycling group come in and stop for a coffee and cake on their ride? What is it that gets people to use the park and really drags people in and makes them want to stay? We can improve biodiversity. We know we can do that and engage people widely. So we're really activating for this now. We're going to talk about this on some of the sessions in a bit more detail tomorrow. We're looking for the next set of spaces. And whilst this is a micro kind of example, we're looking to do this across BCP. Can we find the next suite of 5 or 10 spaces so that we're starting to get a network of Green Heart Parks, and we get the ward council saying, I need one of those, I want one of those. We can then lever and do things differently in terms of how they're funded. And instead of spending lots of money doing up old buildings that are suffering from vandalism, we're doing them up to make them into something progressive and positive for everybody to enjoy and use in different ways. So we're looking at ways to fund that in the next sort of few months. And on the next slide, we zoom back out to the landscape scale, and I think this really chimes with what Drew was just talking about as well. So this is our really exciting Stour Valley Park project, which started way back in 2013 and has now really grown legs and momentum and a whole load of buy-in as well. On the next slide, sorry, actually, on there, you can see that's, sorry, if you go back when I was jumping too quickly, that's 25 kilometres of river corridor going from the sort of Sturminster Newton in Dorset through the Kingston Lacey National Trust estate just to the west of Wimborne, and then all the way down through the peri-urban fringe of North Poole and Bournemouth and into Christchurch, and sort of the Stour comes out into Christchurch Harbour next to Hengistbury Head, which in itself is a highly designated site. So there's some really special places, top and tail of that journey down through the river corridor, as well as along the way. Thanks. And on the next slide, you can see the vision that we've got for this, for the floodplain and for the river corridor as a whole. It taps into archaeology, it taps into old settlements, it taps into new cycling and active travel routes. And on the next slide, there's just a summary of the vast difference this project could make for a wide range of different sort of factors, really. I think if you go one more click, there's more to come on the slide, hopefully. Oh no, sorry, go back one. That's obviously not quite worked right. So from everything from housing development and transportation links, for economy in terms of visitor journeys, sense of place, green economy, diversifying, and the heritage offer, but primarily also the environment and health and well-being. So the ambition within the environmental and the biodiversity work here is huge. We want to use mineral extraction to rewild the floodplains, to lower floodplain levels so that the watercourse can be much more naturalized. We want to have areas that we use within the Stour Valley corridor for biodiversity net gain and habitat banking. So really opening up the possibilities of what this space can be, and at the same time trying to maximize access to improve health and well-being for nearby residents, for all those links and all the positive work and things that can go with that. And that's a real quick snapshot view of what the Stour Valley can be. We're working closely in partnership with the National Trust and Dorset Council as the 3 core partners in that project. It's a partnership of 16 partners, but the 3 core members there I've just mentioned are really taking this on. The National Trust are funding a program manager over the next couple of years, where we've taken a huge amount of work within the Future Parks funded element of the project. And we've written governance and strategy plans, landscape master plans, heritage reports. We're now at the stage where we're now in transition. We're now ready to really sort of start and say, how and where can we deliver this? We got SANGs that we are coming forward that knit part of this jigsaw together, and a lot of other exciting opportunities. On the next slide, we bring all this together. So when we zoom out a little bit and go back and look at that whole green net map of BCP that I introduced at the start, we've got the green infrastructure strategy that really embeds the principles and the policy and priorities for delivery across all of our estate. We've got the green heart parks that really deliver and drive forward how we can help the local communities and people in that conversation and in those spaces. And then the Stour Valley Park, and that little emoji next to that is an otter, if you can see that or not, maybe. We have got otters on the Stour, and we're really excited about the ambition for that scale of project and working in a really exciting partnership. And that's a key word I think I picked up from yesterday and today across all of the work strands, is all of these things. None of these 3 priorities for us we can do on our own. They have to be done in partnership. We want to deliver them with partners like the Parks Foundation, the National Trust and wider. We're then delivering on the green net, multifunctional green space. We're linking in biodiversity net gain. We're obviously the local nature recovery strategies that are still waiting on strategy, on sort of government policy on that to come forward as well. Opportunities for natural capital, habitat banking, green finance. We're part of an environment readiness fund project with the Heritage Fund. And like I say, come back to that word partnerships as well. So on the final slide, take this opportunity to say thank you to everybody who we've worked with over the last couple of years on developing all of that. No, there's no chance in the world we would have been able to develop all of those ideas, thinking and ambition without the Future Park. So a massive thank you to all the team behind that and everybody who's helped as we've taken that forward. So thank you for listening. Hope you are excited by that and happy to get in touch with anybody who wants to know more.
Marvellous, thank you, Martin. Some great visuals there. I'm sure we could have hovered on those for a lot longer and delved into them, but thank you for giving us that fantastic summary. We'll move straight on to Zoe now, after which we'll start to pick up some of the questions that are coming through. So to Zoe, please.
There we go. We're on. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk a little bit about landscape scale change for nature recovery in a city context. And most of us have been talking about cities today, and interesting that John talked very much about that relationship between people and wildlife. That's a key focus. A crazy stat I keep repeating because I'm amazed by it every time I say it is that 68% of the world's population will live in a city by 2050. So this kind of relationship between human and non-human kind is going to become ever more critical. So with this in mind, Plymouth set out to explore the question of how we create positive change for nature at scale within a city context. If you could move to the next slide, please. So what do we want? What's our vision really? Well, we want a city where people, infrastructure and wildlife dynamically interact as part of a single ecosystem, positively supporting the whole system. So, if we're looking at a city as a system, we need to consider this interaction where people, infrastructure and wildlife dynamically interact. And so ecologically, as John touched on, this means looking at joining up ecological spaces, creating nature corridors, ensuring that blue and green join up, going from source to sea. And this is Plymouth here on the map. Obviously, we're surrounded by blue, but we're also surrounded by areas of outstanding natural beauty, Dartmoor National Park. And actually, although the city in the middle looks very grey, we are 40% green space in the city. But as you can see, there are big areas of inequality of green space, and that's also very much linked to health inequalities that we see across the city as well. And what's important when we're looking at a landscape scale is that we are going beyond boundaries, so going beyond the city boundaries, going beyond terrestrial boundaries. So this is our landscape, but it's also a cityscape. So we need to consider people and buildings as well when we're thinking about nature recovery. So a number of people have mentioned the natural capital accounts that we were able to do as part of Future Parks, where we realised there was an estimated £215 million per year of benefits in terms of services to the city, and the majority of that is on health and well-being. So a great opportunity. We know that 8,000 new jobs are expected to come to the area by 2030, of which 2,600 are forecasted to be in the marine sector alone and 400 in the environmental industries. And I don't think that even takes into account the tourism opportunities that we have within this city as well. So lots of exciting opportunity here, I think, with nature recovery that we need to remember. So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview now of what work we've been doing to understand our city as a system, how we've kind of gone about trying to identify some key leverage points that we think will enable us to make some transformational change towards this vision. And then I'm going to share some of the activities that we've been piloting as a result of that learning. Next slide, please. So the word complexity has been mentioned, and don't want to bamboozle you with this kind of jumble of a map, but this is actually a result of systems inquiry that we did, where we interviewed local park users and non-users, key land management, environmental, education and cultural stakeholders in the city. And we did that asking people really what were the key barriers to this vision of a nature city, what were the potential and existing interventions we could apply, and what were the outcomes that we wanted to see. And through that, how we then went on to identify the potential leverage points where we felt that we should invest our time and resources most efficiently. And these fell under 4 key headings, which are kind of in bold here. So firstly, values and attitudes down on the bottom right there. We know these are deep leverage points for change. So we felt that engaging a city in what it means to be nature connected was a really important part of our work. Leadership, which I think is really related to values and attitudes, and make a note, it's leadership rather than leaders, and what kind of leadership's required for a nature city. Policy and practice, that's kind of a less transformational leverage point, but with the emerging new policies nationally, we felt it was a really opportune time to maximise policies that are coming out of the Environment Act. And we're also looking at a review of our joint local plan policies. So really good moment to be looking at those. Practice is really important. So on the ground delivery to show proof of concept. And then finally, co-stewardship, which again is linked to the values and attitudes around caring for nature, new forms of stewardship and governance required for that. So I'm going to touch on each of those and tell you a little bit about what we've done. Next slide, please. So values and attitudes. So we talked about rewilding people, rewilding our minds, creating a city full of green mindsets. And so as part of that, we've been using a number of projects to build nature connection programs, working with a whole range of different sectors and organizations, almost kind of like a campaign to build a movement of people who are connected to nature. And I think we've been working quite a lot with creative industry to come up with unique and original ways to do that across the city, to find ways to make nature more visible. So we all walk through our cities on a daily basis, but do we actually stop to notice the nature around us and to be more mindful? So we've linked up with the University of Derby, working around the Nature Connectedness Index. And I'm really pleased to say that we have a biannual city survey that goes out to about 4,000 residents, and we've been able to embed nature connectedness questions within that survey, which I think even the fact that those questions are there is pretty radical, because people reading that question that comes through their letterbox asking them about how much they care for nature is already going to start people thinking differently about nature. So but we're able to track the results of that over time. So how different communities and different geographies in the area and demographics are connected to nature to start to look at the impact of our work. Next slide, please. So leadership and governance, I think, as a local authority, we manage a large amount of land in the city, but also, we have an influencing role as well in the city, and so working with other large landowners, whether that's social housing providers or people like the National Trust, and working across boundaries is a really important role that we have. And it's great to have our chief exec opening this conference, because we really felt we've got the support of our leaders within the council behind us, so that's really exciting. Leading by example again is really important. You can talk the talk, but can you walk the walk? And the first fails fast. So yes, being the first, is a challenge, and we have to accept that we're going to fail along the way. But how we embed the learning within that and how we share the learning is really critical. We've talked a lot about partnerships, so bringing together the coalition of the willing. You can knock on many doors, but the ones that open, let's grab them and work together. So that's a critical part of our multi-sectoral approach that we're taking. And as part of our initiatives, one of them we've done is bring together around 30 different leaders from different sectors on a 6-month nature-inspired leadership program, where we were able to do some deep work face-to-face and online around what it means to make our decisions in a way that's inspired and focused on nature recovery. Next slide, please. So policy and strategy for nature recovery. Again, people have talked quite a lot about how we map our assets, how we manage our data more effectively. So it's something we've started to do, but something we need to do more of. How we do that in a consistent way that we're able to monitor over time. We've also talked about how we work across multiple city strategies. So this is not just owned by us as the local authority. It's not just owned by the natural infrastructure team. We need to be working really closely as well with transport, with our local lead flood authority, with our health and wellbeing board. So how do we ensure that all of their strategies are informed and talk about the role of nature recovery as part of their own outcomes. And then finally, we want to use new policy that's emerging to push forward new forms of green finance, both marine and terrestrial. So again, biodiversity net gain has been talked about. Green finance is something we're exploring through Future Parks and our Natural Environment Investment Readiness funds. And then how do we integrate funding streams? So, we've talked about money for biodiversity, we've talked about money for carbon, we've talked about money from the health sector, for example. So how do we ensure we are bringing this money together to make the use of it most efficiently and getting more bang for our buck? Okay, next slide, please. And just some examples of local delivery on the ground. So that practice, proof of concept is really important. So again, talked about careers and jobs. And so we have a citywide programme as part of our Green Recovery Challenge called Plymouth Natural Grid, which is supporting green apprenticeships, training and jobs, mainly targeting young people not in employment, education or training, in partnership with National Trust. And that's helping us to develop a kind of neighbourhood approach to kind of community nature rangers that can work with local communities to respond to the needs of that geographical area for nature and for people, and bring new forms of community stewardship on board. We've got a range of natural flood management initiatives happening in parks now, sustainable urban drainage solutions, and we're using them effectively as a lever, if you like, to engage with our water company and to look at opportunities for financing outcomes payments with them. We've also have Plymouth Community Forest, and we're really focusing on how we support young people to engage in that as the next generation who are going to be caring for these trees, and how we support them actually having a say in the governance as we set up that community forest structure. We've got another programme very much focused on marine conservation and preventing plastic pollution. So again, some really exciting and innovative initiatives. On the bottom left photograph, that's a waste shark that floats around the sea and collects rubbish. We've had school children designing the branding for it, and also students analysing what gets collected so that we can determine the effectiveness of it and how we want to roll it out. And then we've had a number of programmes around green social prescribing in our parks through funding from Academy for Social Prescribing, and just looking at how we learn from that, how we develop our parks as health and wellbeing hubs in their own right, and how we roll that out more broadly across the city. And we're just about to start an active travel social prescribing project where going through and between our natural spaces is going to be a key part of that. Next slide, please. Finally, community stewardship. So touched on that again as a key leverage point. So we've been doing a lot of work around with Future Parks around community and social enterprise. So how do we actually ensure that our assets in our park are built assets? There's a lot of sort of underused changing rooms and sort of derelict small buildings. So how do we actually support them to be more financially sustainable? So actually, we've done quite a bit of work supporting, we're in a social enterprise city, supporting social entrepreneurs who want to actually develop these buildings. So that's about changing our processes and procedures in the council to make it simpler and easier to trial initiatives in these spaces, and also encourage new kind of enterprising initiatives in more inclusive ways. And I mean, those social enterprises well know their communities, so you know they're best placed as well to engage with people and know what the needs are there. We've also just heard we've secured some funding from Natural England to explore the notion of green community hubs. So again, a kind of neighbourhood approach to creating hubs within our parks for communities around kind of placemaking for natural spaces. And actually, one of the ladies in the earlier conference talked about placekeeping, which is a great term, which I'm going to start to use because I think that's really what it's about when we're talking about community stewardship. We've also taken a neighbourhood approach. In the middle there, you've got a plan that we've been working on a neighbourhood called Keam, and involving a whole range of different stakeholders in co-design of that neighbourhood's green spaces with a particular focus on rewilding. So we're just about implementing that now. That'll be going on over the next year with a landscaper, but also our teams on the ground, so that communities can be involved in the delivery as well as the design. And of course, Drew mentioned the National Marine Park. So that remit is really about a people's park in the sea. So we have, you know, a number of years. We've just started on this process. How do we engage a more diverse audience with the water, understanding what's under it, and encouraging more people to engage with it, to support that nature connection and support care of the marine environment in terms of how it supports a healthy, sustainable city. So that's the last slide. It's just to say that, you know, we're on a journey. There's lots more to do, and Future Parks has been pivotal, I think, in enabling us to have really strong ambitions, but also be connected to a network of other ambitious and amazing organisations doing this kind of stuff. We're really keen to learn from one another, particularly as we go forward to developing our local nature recovery plan. That's the key next step. So whilst we're engaging at a county level, we really want to drill down to the city delivery. We also need to improve on our environmental data gathering and management, but alongside that, we're looking to build a kind of social and cultural indicator framework so that we can bring those two together, like I mentioned at the beginning. And it's also really important that we continue to deliver on the ground change with our communities, so we can bring them along. It's got to be about delivery as well as policy and strategy. So that's where we're at. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much. Welcome back, Martin, as well. Now we've got about 10 minutes for some questions and answers, a few coming through on the line, and I'll try and sort of present questions that pick up and summarise themes in there. One thing that strikes me when you're working at this scale is how you go about working with stakeholders, which ones you prioritise. What's your experience of working with stakeholders? And in the questions, landowners in particular are mentioned. Martin, perhaps first.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, it's a good question, and I probably raced through a little bit and kind of meant to touch on that. So the consultants we employed to take forward the Stour Valley Park really kind of set out from the start how they wanted to try and engage and work on the ground and with local communities as well. So they did a whole series of different workshops around all sorts, around sort of visioning and governance and a whole different, and sort of, and wildlife and biodiversity as well, around how people could get involved and have their say to make sure they felt included, and this thing wasn't being forced upon them. As most any project of this sort of scale and ambition, I think there's a fear of change. So it's very much, I think it's about boots on the ground. I think it's walking the ground with the landowners, trying to understand how they've managed the land, sometimes in some cases for generations and family after family. So and it's about respecting that as well, and then trying to find the opportunities that work with everybody. And obviously, when I listened to some of those workshops, and there was a fear of are you going to just get active travel routes for every massive great cycle highways everywhere, or visitor centres everywhere with masses of vehicles traipsing through villages and stuff. And it's understanding where that comes from, and really being able to answer that in detail, and kind of have the plans to try and show that actually this is driven by biodiversity sort of need and the wider benefits of the whole scheme. And that's a slow, long process. And I think, again, come back to my end point, I think I ended with around partnership as well. I think you do that through having the right people in the room. So when you got Natural England sat with you, and you're working with the Natural Trust and a range of other partners, then you grow that confidence, I suppose. But definitely boots on the ground, and it's not easy, and it takes a long time. Oh, you're on mute, John.
Thank you. Similar, Zoe, you mentioned Coalition of the Willing, which I think was hinting at this. So what about the stakeholder experience in Plymouth?
Well, echoing Martin's comments around it being hard work. Relationships take time, and to some degree they've been even more challenging because we haven't been able to see each other face to face. So again, boots on the ground, being present in your local communities is critical, I think, so that people trust you at a community level. Working with people who want to work with you, I think it will create a ripple effect. So going back to that systems map, you're not always sure where that ripple is going to be, but reaching out and bringing people who want to come with you along will enable that kind of cascade. I also think it's about engaging people at different levels. So as a local authority, we've got access to boards that different our chief exec sits on, where we're able to ensure that she talks about these issues and puts them as a priority, down to grassroots community builders that our community connections team work with communities out on the ground. So I think it's about looking at all of these levels, not just thinking, we need to go for the big leaders, but how do we influence at all of these different levels? And I do think we're in a unique position. It never ceases to astound me within a local authority how many different departments we have, and how each department doesn't know what the other one's doing. So there's a great opportunity even within our own organisation to pull different sectors together. And I think a lot of people have talked about the advantages of this, the benefits that nature can bring to these sectors. So how do we share that and demonstrate that value to bring them on board? So but there's no doubt it's a lot of graft, and being able to bring in external funding to support staff to be able to spend time on this and evidence the impact is challenging but really critical.
Thank you. And just sort of you were both talking about communities there, and so I'm interested in that community angle, and particularly sustaining community involvement. So, you know, projects come and go. These are significant things which are building something for the future. Do you have any observations on how you're going to build in that sustainable community involvement into the future? Martin.
Thanks. Well, yeah, and again, without wanting to kind of talk through my presentation I'm doing tomorrow afternoon as well. Yeah, I mentioned briefly sort of the Parks Foundation, who are sort of a charity set up within BCP independently, specifically there with objects to improve open space, you know, improve green space in the broadest sense of that. So we work really closely with Kathy and the team at the foundation. They actually submitted the bid for the FPA project just before BCP came into being, and so are actually sort of key allies in delivering over and above sort of bog standard parks maintenance, if you like, and kind of the usual things that councils can do. And I think with that comes yeah, kind of real community links and strength in terms of being able to do things differently, whether that's fundraising or talking to the community or having a different route through problems in terms of, you know, the ways that the council might normally go about things, long and bureaucratic systems in place or procurement rules, whatever it might be. Having the foundation as a charity can circumvent some of that in the right way, and, you know, really tap into that sort of community spirit. So everything I mentioned about Green Heart Parks and all of that model, that doesn't have to be the Parks Foundation. It could be other stakeholders, community partners, but they've very much shaped that model with us. And I think that just, yeah, really brings that sort of strength for us into what we're trying to deliver. And yeah, I think your question was more about kind of, yeah, the benefits of the community stuff, but I think they're through that, yeah, having somewhere where, you know, people can volunteer and kind of, you know it's going to be open, know there's a safe space to go and visit and see like-minded people and all of those benefits. So.
Thanks, Martin. And Zoe, the community angle.
Yeah, I think I guess, you know, building on what I mentioned earlier around that, the opportunities for community enterprise. So we have a number of organisations who are based in and around our local parks, who either are a CIC or a social enterprise. So again, we've been supporting them to have you know, really clear business plans, look at what income they can bring in to try and again support that sustainability, because you know, the reality is you know, our sort of traditional model of friends groups, we've realized has a number of issues. One, they're not necessarily representative of the local community, and two, they tend to be older people, and once, you know, one of them's disappeared, then they kind of fall apart, you know. So whilst they still have a value, and we recognize there's a spectrum of participation and people will come in at different levels, looking at enterprise opportunities as a way to kind of sustain activity in our parks and making the most use of those built assets that Martin talked about. So they can run them effectively to engage a more diverse audience, so people feel more comfortable coming into those spaces because they've got a place to go to the loo or have a cuppa, and potentially that also brings in opportunities for other sustainable forms of income, whether you're renting out a room or offering classes or activities for people.
Fantastic, thank you both. We're running quite tight on time, so I'm going to come in a minute to that question that ended the last session. What's the one piece of advice you'd want to give anyone who's started down this route of working at this scale? While you think about that, I will say there are some questions we haven't covered in the QA, so perhaps we can just do that in the chat later. But there, that question, one bit of advice to anybody starting down this route, Martin.
I mean, that's quite difficult. I think be patient, be patient, but don't lose sight of the ambition and the big goal at the end. I think that's really important. And I think, again, challenge everything we've heard over the last sort of day and a bit. So yeah, trying to think big, especially on that landscape scale stuff. The bigger, there's so many opportunities with the new, you know, Environment Act and what that's brought, biodiversity net gain and other things. So yeah, bigger the better.
Thank you, Zoe.
So I think, yes, agree with that. And building on that, how do we celebrate our progress? So how do we keep people on board and bring more people on board to be part of that movement, I think is critical. And so part of celebrating the achievements and steps along the way and demonstrating that impact, I think is really important.
Thank you. Fantastic. I think we've really just touched the surface there, but those were absolutely fantastic and inspiring, genuinely inspiring talks. The thing that came across to me is when you are working at this scale, some of the stats on the outcomes are, absolutely staggering. 2,500 jobs connected to the environment in Plymouth. And that's a serious thing. That's a big thing. The health benefits, they are really, really big things. You both spoke about systems thinking. Martin, the map down through the Stour Valley there, thinking about that system together. Zoe, I didn't need to be able to read all the dots on your systems map to see that people, the environment, health and wellbeing and prosperity are absolutely inexorably linked. I took a lot to think about for Natural England there and its leadership, and leadership came across really strongly. As did a sense of movement, actually. I think you used the phrase creating a movement, Zoe, but it was right through what you were saying as well, Martin. At that sort of scale, you have to create a movement to make it sustained. So I'll say thank you so much. That was inspiring. Thank you both, and I'll hand back now to Drew.
Well, thank you, John, Martin, and Zoe. I keep using the word brilliant. I'm sorry I'm saying it so often, but I'm glad someone else in the chat has just said that this is absolutely packed with content, this conference. So thank you very much. There are so many topics that we could have covered just in this afternoon session on nature. So, do have a look at the Miro board, do have a look at the website, including a podcast that we did last week, talking to some of the other FPA projects that have also done really interesting work around nature networks. And that was with Claire Warburton of Natural England as well. So do take a look at that as well. I did also say that we would be talking beyond parks. So I think hopefully this conference has so far demonstrated that we're not just talking about parks, we're talking about all urban green spaces. Parks are an important part of that. They, if you are like the heart of these systems, but it's all the component parts, the streets, the avenues, the corridors, the linear walkways, the squares, promenades, whatever. All of those are equally important. There were just a few things I was just really keen to sum up from this afternoon. And I know we've had a lot of themes that have come through, whether it's health, well-being, etc. But there are also some other things that just really came through. I just wanted to make sure that people had kind of clocked really. Beth talking about disconnection from nature. And I've heard it said before, I think most of us are 4 generations disconnected from the land. So that deep connection with nature is something that we need to get back to. And I've heard George Monbiot in the past talk about shifting baseline syndrome. So, I imagine nature. I used to drive and my car windscreen would be absolutely plastered in flies if I drove down the M4. We've lost a huge amount of nature already. We can't afford to carry on losing the nature at the rate we are, and bringing nature back to towns and cities is really important. Equality, I think, has come through in a whole series of different ways, whether that's equality of access to green space, opportunities to engage with green space and understanding the barriers and the ways that are stopping some people from being able to access green space. Also, the fact that I think the pandemic demonstrated that the most deprived are often the most disadvantaged, and that work's been clearly shown in the work that Birmingham have been doing. And also just the diversity of the workforce as well. Within the environment sector, we need to do a lot to make our workforce, whether that's our employed staff or volunteers, more representative of the population. Digital has also come through really clearly. I think we've heard a lot about mapping and the importance of mapping to just try and understand what's happening on the ground, and also trying to identify those opportunities and places where the need can really be well addressed, even down to mapping climate change, microclimates, and understanding how places can be more pleasant to engage, but not forgetting that digital is also important for engagement as well, and particularly engaging with new, younger audiences. So thinking about social media. And there's some good stuff on the Heritage Fund website. There's a digital cultural compass, which will help you work out how good your organisation really is at digital. And the last thing I was on that was around evidence. And I think, you know, we've seen some brilliant examples today, and they are so powerful, I think, in convincing people that, you know, we need to sort out urban green space and sort out the green nature of our cities. And, you know, Alfred Place in Camden, what's happening in Cardiff, there are some excellent examples that I think people need to really follow up on. Seeing all of this is makes me quite emotional, seeing all this work that has been achieved over the last 3 years since we started talking about this. I think it was probably nearly 5 years ago. And the most important thing I think about Future Parks is we've helped to create that headspace and bring in those experts to work with all the cohort and all those places that have delivered so many brilliant projects. And each individual FPA project has delivered a whole host of individual projects underneath it. So there is a web of information which you'll find on the website. We have done an evaluation. Heritage Fund always does evaluations of our programs, and we can share a link, and I think it's already been shared, to our program evaluation summary. There will be a full evaluation report, and each of our 8 projects is also doing its own evaluation. So we really need to learn from the process and also from how the individual projects work together as a cohort. And we're really keen to share all of that with people going forward. And thanks again to the FPA team, all those people that have been sat behind computers today, and also the Iris and Birch, the production team, because I think, you know, it is brilliant that we've been able to do an online conference and been able to have so many people engage. So lastly, just to say, we've not finished yet. There are more subjects to come tomorrow. So tomorrow we're going to be focusing on community activation and participation, and probably a really crucial one, funding, finance and new business models that I'm sure a lot of people will be very interested in. So we're excited about the final session tomorrow. There's also a final session, which is the project directors from the FPA projects, who will be sharing their know-how on how to transform urban places for people, places, climate and nature. So that last section is really going to be very useful in pulling out the recommendations from this whole 4 years worth of work. That brings us to the end of this afternoon's proceedings. So thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you'll manage with the wrestle with the IT. We look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. And I'm off to my allotment immediately to go and get some fresh air and get my broad bean seeds sown. So go off and enjoy some nature this afternoon and enjoy what's left of the day. Thank you very much.